there was a Helm demo last week. Hopefully most of you caught that. And part of Helm is, well, a big part of Helm is the actual charts that go with it. So it's kind of what I'm going to show you a bit of today. So while this repository here is in the making, over at Bitnami, we have our own charts repository. And this was originally our charts repository for Helm Classic, but we're slowly converting all the charts here to the new Helm 2.0 Kubernetes Helm. So here you can see there's a bunch of charts for various applications and services that we've already have and we're testing. Some of them don't have the latest features like deployments, or some of them still using replication controllers, but we're slowly migrating them to those new features. So I'm going to go ahead and do demo some of the charts there. So let me make this a little bit bigger. So hopefully you can all see that. I have a Redmine chart here that I'm going to go ahead and install. And I'm passing in some specific values that I've specified over here. So with Helm, I was just easily able to, and by the way, this is the same Redmine from the repository that I just showed you. With Helm, I was just able to easily install that, passing the directory where that chart exists, and passing in some extra values to override some stuff. So while that's starting up, I'll kind of explain. So I think this feature isn't in the Helm Alpha free, but if I do Helm status, I can get some information about what's actually been deployed here, and I can see there are 2 services created, 2 deployments, and 2 secrets. So on the right-hand side here, I have my overrides for the values. And if I go and have a look at the Redmine charts, values.yaml file, you can kind of see what I can configure for this Redmine chart here. So if you haven't heard of Redmine, it's kind of like a project management tool, bug reporting tool. So this chart will just get you easily up and running, just specifying some values for, in my case, I've specified the username, the password, and I also wanted to make it persistent, so I specified a volume claim here. And I'll show you how that's actually being used in the chart. So if I open up the deployments here, it might be a little bit too big. Actually, I can use this over. So a couple of things here. The way we're setting the name is using a template. So this is kind of new to Helm 2.0. This wasn't in Helm Classic. And it's a really useful feature for kind of sharing partials between templates. So you essentially define a partial file where you can define a bunch of templates. And in this case, I've got defined full name function, and it basically just concatenates the release name with the name of the chart and truncates that to 24 characters. So then I use that full name template across the chart for all the for the names of the services, the secrets, and deployment. And that's really useful because then I can deploy multiple versions of Redmine and have them all kind of independent of each other. So I could even just go and deploy another one, and it's got a different name. If I get the pods, you can see there's a different name. And it's completely independent of the one I deployed earlier. Oops. So other things here are got some labels defined. We haven't really kind of standardized on what labels should be necessary. We've kind of gone for specifying the release.service, which is Tiller in this case. You've got a release name and the chart name, but there's not really any for these. I'd actually be interested to see how people might want to use the question.
I don't know if Eric wanted to ask this question, but I had a question after that.
Okay, so Eric asked, I need to provide the redmine values.yaml. Is there a flow that prompts a naive user to provide these values? So no, it would essentially be something you'd have to read in the documentation, or if you pull up the values.yaml file, you'd have to go through this and see what values are configurable. I can even show you the README for this chart, where you can also see the values that you can define.
So this would be the kind of thing that would be a nice feature request for Helm, right?
Actually, I think there's an issue about.
Okay.
I think there's an issue about an interactive, kind of an interactive prompt for entering values.
So is this the time when we go and say, hey, Matt, this is our verbal feature request. Can you just magically make sure it gets in there?
We have this issue queue for these things. Yeah, the Helm inspect command that's very new will allow you to print the values file that's in there and look at the contents before you install it.
Oh yeah, let me try that out.
It'd be nice to have something a little smarter than that, but maybe that's not an alpha thing.
Okay, that's pretty sweet. So yeah, it just prints out the values.yaml. But yeah, I think there's also an issue about having kind of an interactive setup for a chart where it kind of prompts you for the default values of things that you can set.
Yeah, you're correct. There is an issue for that.
So the question I was going to ask too, like I haven't followed the latest stuff with Helm. I noticed a lot of the charts you guys have nest the MariaDB one. Are those symlinks, or what's the latest on? I have MariaDB. It's basically the same chart across all of your repos. What mechanisms will there be for you guys to share those charts?
So right now it is copying and pasting. We haven't really kind of discussed what the best workflow there is. I know we've thrown ideas around, like maybe having something like a glide.yaml file for your chart dependencies. I don't know if you wanted to touch on that, Matt.
There's an issue tracking that one too, because we've talked, as Adnan just said, we've been talking about whether we want to add a little, like a lock manifest file that would track a bunch. I was going to look up the issue. I'll look up the issue and drop it into chat rather than.
Thanks. Yeah, because the common pattern here is I wanted to find something that implements the MariaDB interface, quote unquote, that a bunch of things can reuse, and so that someone can get the benefit of doing it once. Getting that problem solved in a way that we can find the convention / specification 80-20 rule, right? Like what's the thing that lets us get as much value from reusing common MySQL MariaDB templates as much as possible, so that people can actually swap out, for instance, MariaDB with MariaDB cluster or with a MySQL cluster, et cetera.
Clayton, just to clarify, I think you're saying that if Redmine and let's say Minecraft both need a DB, then you want to include the chart for MariaDB. You're not saying that if you have a cluster and you install Redmine and Minecraft, that you want them to use a single service.
Correct.
That provides a database.
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
I think the biggest challenge that people have stumbled with Cube across the whole ecosystem today is reusing finding reusable bits. Like I think on OpenShift on the template side, a lot of things we struggle with is you get the first value with what like charts have and what templates have, where you can go define all in one, it all works together, but then you end up doing a lot of copy and pasting, trying to get that next step so that we can recommend something that works for a lot of people a lot of the time, so that they get more reuse and we can start stopping the gross cutting and pasting and only cutting and pasting where we need to.
Isn't the first priority to solve that problem for charts contributors, and solving it for end users is a more complex and later problem?
I think so. In practice, the chart contributors are the ones who, you're not going to be able to take a MariaDB that someone else sets up and run it with your own setup today. There's just too much complexity. So I agree, like chart contributors is a reasonable place to start there.
Yeah, and the subchart mechanism, the idea behind it is that somebody would write a very full-featured MariaDB chart, and someone else, and ideally, match the conventions of someone who wrote the full-featured MySQL and the full-featured Percona chart. And then, other chart authors would be able to enter in those charts and provide the right toggle switches to switch back and forth and handle any of the edge cases.
Right, and I think my appeal to the Kube ecosystem in general and the Docker ecosystem is that we need to move beyond that, right? Like I know of at least 6 quote-unquote production-ready MySQL images, and none of them are compatible today, and they all have different experiences. Doing what we can to kind of clarify what expectations might be, even if it's just verbal and you can point someone to an example, and we have kind of agreement across a number of participants to try and fit within that, helps everybody, right? Because it means it's more likely for a Kube example to run in a bunch of different scopes, and we can, like Bitnami and Red Hat and other folks in the ecosystem who are providing images can start to try to kind of, and that's, I don't know that it's a pipe dream, but just getting to the point where we can state some conventions across the Kube ecosystem would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And that also leads into the service catalog work. For those who are familiar with the discussions around service catalogs and what Cloud Foundry does today, where you can say, I want a MySQL database and it can go provision it. There's definitely the desire in the service catalog SIG to bring some of that capability to Kube. Slightly different problem because the expectation would be someone else is managing the DB for you, but we'll want to look for conventions that we can apply across both of those that mean someone could use a service catalog database or a chart or a third-party, defined whatever it is, and have reasonable expectation of their example working means the whole community is more useful.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, again, it'd be great to kind of discuss on the issue how exactly that works. To answer Vic's question, you can't use symlinks today, I think, with the way that Helm deploys. But that, may potentially be a way that we support that.
Maybe that's a topic we can queue up for SIG-Apps in a couple of weeks, which is discuss conventions for charts and how we document those or suggest those across a number of different things. Yeah,
and that's something, and if it comes to documentation, that's something we definitely want to enforce for the official charts repository. And it would be in the guidelines there, and we make sure that charts are following that when we're reviewing those. So for some reason this isn't working. Trust the demo gods to fail me. But I can assure you it was working before. But I did have another demo as well. I was going to demo something slightly different to Redmine. I've been kind of playing around with a kind of Heroku-like experience for Helm. So I have this lamp chart here, which I'll quickly show you. Actually, I'll deploy it first, so it has some time to. So the idea is I can have a chart that knows how to run any PHP framework. And I just kind of pass it a Git repo and tell it what kind of framework it is, and it can figure out how to run that. So if I open up start, MariaDB. So here, what I'm doing is I'm changing so I have a template called lamp-ems, which just adds some extra environment variables, but the lamp.arg. So if I open up the helpers file, in lamp.args, I'm basically changing the command to use based on the type of framework. And right now I've only implemented starting up the default PHP server or starting up the Laravel server. But you can see it's easy to extend this to support Symfony or CodeIgniter or any other framework out there. And then the other thing I had here was when the container starts, it's going to do an artisan migrate, so it's going to migrate the database. So hopefully, what state is this? So it seems to be running. And there we go. So, and actually, I'll just show you the repository I was using there. If I go to this repository, I've just pushed a basic Laravel application here from the quick start tutorial. And I've done demos before on SIG-Apps, and they usually end up in to-do apps. So I'm kind of following that trend here. But a very simple to-do app that connects to a MariaDB database, and all I had to do was pass a Git URL. So Eric mentioned this reminds you of Bitnami infrastructure stacks. Yes, to an extent, but in a way this is even easier because with a traditional Bitnami LAMP stack, you'd have to go and deploy that and then SSH and set up, kind of the traditional way. And this just kind of gives you a way to get that up and running with a single command. So it's actually more like a Heroku style experience. Cool. So I think I've gone over time, but
yeah, thank you for sharing. Are there any last questions about this?
What if migration fails? So that's a good question. I kind of just did this to play around with you, and I did this a couple of weeks ago, and then I kind of didn't have time for it anymore. But I want to get back to it and answer some of those questions. I think in the case of the way it's running it, it's doing a post start, and I think if that fails, it'll just retry again, but I'm not entirely sure.
It will not retry it. If post start fails, it marks as failed on status. At least that was as of the last time I looked at it. Okay.
The other option I was thinking is using the post hook for Helm. So after a post install job could bring up the PHP container and
there's a discussion going on for deployment hooks, post, pre, and mid, which come out of like the work in OpenShift. Like in OpenShift, we do pre. Like depending on the strategy, we'll do like a recreate deployment, and then we'll use the mid hook, which is while all instances are down, to do the migration step. But definitely, like I think there's at least some hope that the deployment hooks would address some of this, but I think having a good discussion about that in this call, which is maybe as a topic for the week after next or something like that, or next week or the week after, is what can we do to enable in deployments some of these cases, and can we get a general agreement or debate around whether deployment hooks are the right thing or whether we want to add more hooks in other places?
Yeah, definitely. And Helm actually supports hooks today. So I don't know if that's the same thing you were talking about. I know Vic mentioned init container, and I know there's some work going on there, but I haven't really looked into it.
Yeah, I think they're variants for sure.
Yeah. And I think in some cases it also depends on the type of application. To answer your question, Matt, yes, this is the part where it's loading the Git repo. In this case, it's actually required. It will fail if you don't specify it.
All right.
Is there a clear path for upgrading when I commit something new? Good question. I haven't had time to try it out. I would like to. I'm not sure how the Git repo volume works, but I presume it checks out the new code every time, so a redeploy should just do a new clone of that repository.
All right. Well, thank you for all the details and information. Oh, we got more questions.
Isn't it better to have image with the application so it can be deployed consistently in case go? Yeah. So that's a very good point, and it's something we've been discussing here as well. This is kind of like I wanted to try it out, see what that I guess workflow would look like. But certainly, you may just want to provide an image that has the application code baked in as well.
All right, thanks. So the next thing I wanted to talk about today was the new Go client that's part of Kubernetes. Maybe stop sharing your screen. I'll share real quick. And I know we're almost at time, so I'll try to make this quick. So I believe you now see my screen, which is the Go client. Can you all see it?
Yeah.
Should be GitHub. All right. And so what you'll see here is in the Kubernetes vendor directory, in the k8s.io directory, there's a symlink to something called Client Go. This is a new thing, and if we go track it down, what we'll see is there's an area called staging, source, and this is where the client is stored. In fact, you can see a version 1.4 directory here. And what I was looking for was anybody who was aware of what's going on with this development, how it's happening, to try and track this down, because, you know, client libraries are part of the developer's experience when they're building tools and things like that. And so this is an area that seemed appropriate for us to get invested in. And so I was curious if anybody knew what was going on here, or where, or any of the details.
I know a teeny bit about it.
Oh, please share.
We want to make it easy. Daniel Smith, Lava Lamp, is leading this. The plan is to move this to a new repository called Kubernetes/client-go. So this is a temporary state. Once this code gets copied to Kubernetes client Go, there won't be a symlink. It'll just be a plain old vendor of this.
Now,
and probably for Kubernetes, I'm not 100% sure on that, but definitely anything else that's not in Kubernetes/Kubernetes that wants a client, we're going to recommend that they vendor Kubernetes/client Go, the entire thing, and they've got everything they need to write a controller or a basic thing that talks to the API server.
do you know when the plan is to migrate this to its own repository?
Very soon. They're wrangling over permission to create the Kubernetes client-go, I think in a couple of weeks.
Okay. Do you know what the structure is like? Because I see a directory for the what appears to be the 1.4 version. what the plan is for the directory structure around this?
I don't. If you direct message me, I will get you in touch with the right people.
I can answer a couple of questions. The directory structure is going to mirror Cube in the near term, and then at version boundaries, we will probably start refactoring dependencies out. The core dependencies like client cache and the core clients themselves will be in fairly stable tags and have stable type names. But the dependency types may change as we refine them over future releases.
Well, yeah, this was the thing that confused me a little bit. There's a directory for 1.4. Wouldn't you have a client that works across all versions of, say, Kubernetes 1, and then it behind the scene extrapolates that away? This seems like an odd way.
I can answer that. There's no similarity between the version number 1.4 and for the client and the version number 1.4 for the Kubernetes server. They're just coincidentally similar. Is that right, Daniel?
That's Clayton.
No, Daniel just walked by my cube. 1.4 on the client is the same thing as is not related to 1.4 on the server, right? Okay, I'll take it offline.
Yeah, so the directory is we will snapshot at releases, and you will have there will be a version that tracks the 1.4 release, but the between 1.4 and 1.5, the interfaces won't change.
This just seems like a very odd way. If I'm an app developer building something, I would import the client, and it would be able to talk to the API, and I wouldn't have to figure out differences in versions.
You wouldn't see 1.4. You would only see client go. You can specify deeper versions, but it won't look like this. You won't see 1.4 in the final repo.
These files will work with a 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, 1.6 API server. 1.4 is like the release of the client code that has all the bug fixes that were ready at the time that we happened to release 1.4 also as the server, but it's not bound to that server version.
Yeah, and what you'd normally expect is not directories to do that, but the typical release structure is tags, right? And so that's why I was surprised to see it as a directory structure, and I'm wondering whether it will be ported to a tagging scheme and like semantic versioning or something.
That's an artifact of the structure that we're using to move it out of this repo. Once it goes into its own repo, you won't see 1.4.
Okay. So it'll be like a branch or something in the new repo?
I don't remember whether we said branch or whether there'd be a subdirectory that allows you to lock to that, but I don't think we would generally advocate locking to 1.4. There were various discussions about letting someone lock to 1.4, but we plan to lock the API version, not to release it in general.
Okay, and so those of us who might be interested in something like this should talk to Daniel.
You should go to the SIG CSI, I think it's called, or SIG API machinery, or the mailing list or the Slack channel for that, and someone will answer your question.
Okay. For others who'd be interested in using it, this is the place to go for it, because I know there's been a lot of conversation about clients over time and how do we do it, because importing all of Kubernetes to get some of its packages has been a huge problem that people have been talking about over time. I'm glad to see this kind of thing happening, but I know there's a bit of it.
I would say I would sit tight a couple weeks and wait till they actually move it out to the new repo. They're just getting ready to make an announcement, but you might have to do some extra work if you try and pick it up today.
Yeah, I've already tried to fumble with it today. All right, thank you. That's what I was looking for. All right. So I'll stop my share. That is what I had. Do we have anything else today? Let's see. The follow-up on last week's discussion about making it more technical and talking about stateful apps. Michelle, is there anything else we should talk about with the follow-up to last week's discussion? I think you're here now.
Yeah, Clayton just had mentioned in the agenda that he was talking to some folks. So thanks, Clayton, for that. I'll follow up with you separately. Eric, do you have any updates on the proposal, or are we still waiting on that? No rush. I'm just wanted to get an update on that.
In the issue, I commented that I was fine with having two directories and one inside the single GitHub repository. And I do have additional thoughts, but I was hoping I could unblock some stuff, but if we can agree on that. Okay, cool. And so for everyone who isn't caught up, Eric is talking about the Kubernetes charts repository. There's a link to the proposal on how to structure that. So if you have examples of stateful apps, you can submit it there in the form of charts. Okay,
Okay, that's all I have.
All right, so we're a few minutes over. Is there any last comments, questions, anything like that? All right, everyone, have a wonderful week, and we'll see you all online. Bye.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.